Hello, everybody. I'm Phil Brandt, President and CEO of AIM Employers Association, and welcome to This Week at Work.
This Week at Work is the only show about the workplace that offers you front row seats and a microphone, featuring experts in human resources and employment law to bring you practical, timely, and accurate insights so you can more effectively lead your organization. It's Thursday, August 24th, episode 245. Today, we unveil the unexpected twists in Social Security projections and what that means for you when planning your compensation budget for 2024. Dive into the world of economic forecasts with insights from Phil Brandt and compensation expert Michael Maciekowich. And don't miss the revealing insights from Mikey Mac's renowned Cardboard Box Index. And as always, we encourage you to get involved in the show. So speak up, take the poll, and ask your questions now. All this and more on This Week at Work.
Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm coming from Bloomington, Illinois, where we are having our Central Illinois HR conference. We have several of the local Central Illinois SHRM chapters and AIM partnering together. It's a great relationship between SHRM and AIM, and we have a sold-out program today with several keynote speakers and breakout sessions. It's a wonderful Central Illinois conference. I'm happy to be a part of this type of program. It's going to be a fantastic day. So as soon as we're done, I have to get out on the floor and start meeting our members and guests. And I also have a speaking engagement today, Bert. So we're going to talk a little bit about speaking the language of the C-suite, which is one of my favorite topics to help HR professionals with. So fantastic day lined up for me, Bert, but I know you have been as busy as I have when it comes to helping your clients, our members, with their challenges. Anything in particular that's driving the busyness for your business?
I think anxiety and confusion is what I'm seeing most from my clients these days, is a combination of that. You've got companies that feel like they're under attack from the federal and state administrative agencies, combined with a lot of uncertainty in business. You've still got sectors of the economy where they can't find enough employees, and you've got other sectors of the economy that are literally having position eliminations. And it's just really causing a lot of confusion and a lot of anxiety out there.
Yeah, I know I'm experiencing some of the same things. I'm not experiencing many layoff scenarios, and I know Mikey Mac is our guest today, and we're going to get to him in just a moment. And he is going to talk a little bit about his forecast and crystal ball look into 2024. And I suspect he'll talk a little bit about some more of that confusion of, where we're at with the economy and what he's hearing from economists around the U.S. as it relates to what we might expect when it comes to pay raises. But it is definitely a very interesting time, and it is a hard job for the HR professionals today to have to comply with not only a changing federal environment, but the changes that occur by state. They all don't necessarily comply, and some of them conflict with each other. It's darn near impossible. And then you just put the human impact on that, and the conditions and requirements that humans expect beyond what might be anticipated or expected from a federal or state regulation. And it makes the job really hard. So, Bert, with that, we're going to help give them some guidance with Lawyer on the Clock today. Are you ready for that?
I am. Are you going to do the poll first, Phil, or we just jump
Bert,
into Lawyer on the Clock?
This might be the second or third week in a row you've had to remind me of the poll question. So yes, I'm going to do that. We got two great poll questions here. First poll question is, where are you in the process of budgeting for 2024 compensation? So I'd like to know where that is for you, and it relates to your budget and what you're thinking for 2024. And we're going to hear from Mikey in just a moment on that. And the second one, my word cloud. Nick, another great question here. In one word, describe your employees' expectations when it comes to their compensation. That's a great question. In one word, describe your employees' expectations when it comes to their compensation.
I've got an answer for that one. More.
More? I bet
More.
we might see that one show up. Absolutely. More, not enough. Always the bare minimum, whatever it might be. We'll see what it is, but do your best. Keep that in one word. All right, lawyer, are you ready to be on the clock?
I am ready for that, Phil.
All right, Nick, roll it.
All right, it's time to look into what's trending in employment law. Lawyer, you're on the clock.
So you heard it here first. There are some rumors out there. And again, these are just rumors. According to a TSA and a Border Patrol whistleblower, or whistleblowers plural, they are saying that they are attending meetings and seeing documents out there that say that the TSA is going to be reinstating.
Don't say it. I'm afraid where you're going, Bert. Don't say it.
Reinstating the mask mandate for TSA and airport employees starting in mid-September. And then there's rumors that mask wearing will be mandated for pilots, flight staff, passengers, and all airport patrons beginning mid-October. I have no idea if this is true or not, but you heard it here. There is a new COVID variant out there that's getting a lot of attention, called variant BA.2.86. And this variant carries a large number of mutations, and it's being suggested that there are going to be new mask mandates coming, and even vaccine mandates on top of that. Interestingly, there are a couple of universities, Rutgers University in particular, that is still maintaining its policy on masking and COVID vaccine mandates, and another university, Atlanta-based Morris Brown College, reinstated their COVID mask mandates just yesterday. So get ready. It looks like it might be time for masking again come September, October area. So again, those are rumors, but what is not a rumor is that the Fifth Circuit, which is not our Eighth Circuit here in Missouri and in the Midwest, Illinois and Indiana are in the Seventh Circuit, but the Fifth Circuit issued a decision last week which really wiped out a long-standing employer-friendly legal test for evaluating whether claims under Title VII are actionable. That test had required that workers allege that they suffered an illegal adverse employment action to show that their employer's conduct amounted to what's called an ultimate employment decision, like a hiring, termination, or pay cut for their suits to be viable. It had to be an ultimate employment action. Under this new standard, the Fifth Circuit, in an en banc, which means a full Fifth Circuit decision, they decided that employees or job applicants can pursue a wider swath of claims, including allegations that they were subjected to bias based on any terms and conditions or privileges of employment. That has largely looked similar to what we might look at in the Eighth Circuit here, where we say that it doesn't necessarily have to be an ultimate employment decision, but it can just be a decision that impacts the terms and conditions of employment. Now, why am I talking about the Fifth Circuit decision here? Well, that's going to lead me into another discussion that's been getting a lot of attention lately, and that is in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision regarding race-based policies or procedures or application criteria at universities, which came out about a month ago. 5 journalists just sued Gannett Company, the media company, in a proposed class action alleging that the media company's diversity policies gave preferential treatment to minorities at the expense of non-minority employees. They filed the suit in Virginia federal court, and they say that Gannett prioritized minority candidates over non-minorities in hiring, promotions, and salaries. And they said, again, in the lawsuit, that while the policy is purportedly designed to achieve inclusion quotas, it has led to Gannett favoring unqualified minority candidates for job openings in leadership positions and also impacted salaries. It builds on that. And so I'm talking about the Fifth Circuit widening the bias law, that it doesn't need to be an ultimate employment action. It can just be certain terms and conditions of employment that impact the person. It doesn't have to be the actual salary itself or the hiring or the firing. It can be lesser things that are actionable. And then you take this this lawsuit, this reverse discrimination lawsuit in Virginia. And then the last thing I want to tie it to, Phil, is a very significant development that in June, the United States Supreme Court decided that they would hear a case that that all of should be of interest to all of us right here in St. Louis. The case is called Muldrow versus the City of St. Louis. And so the Supreme Court decided to hear this case. And what's going to happen is this gives the court an opportunity. And when I say the court, I mean the U.S. Supreme Court, an opportunity to resolve a circuit split about the types of discriminatory employment practices that are actionable. So again, the Supreme Court is going to make a decision over exactly what that Fifth Circuit just decided, widening the scope of the anti-bias laws. The Fifth Circuit's going, or the Supreme Court is now going to squarely decide whether what constitutes an adverse employment action, whether it's something that's an ultimate job action or whether it's something lesser than that. Now, while this Muldrow case does not squarely address diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, the Supreme Court opinion could, and in my opinion, will likely put those efforts at greater risk. For instance, if the court decides to interpret Title VII broadly, an employee excluded from a DE&I program because of a characteristic Title VII covers, such as race or sex, could succeed in a reverse discrimination suit, even if exclusion from the program did not cause any significant harm. So really, the person doesn't have to suffer significant harm if these lesser actions can be included as adverse employment actions. So broadening Title VII in that way could really spill over into other areas of anti-discrimination laws. This case to me is really interesting. Jatanya Muldrow, who was a sergeant with the St. Louis Police Department, challenged her involuntary transfer from one division to another, arguing that she was transferred solely on the basis of her sex. Though her compensation and formal rank remained ineffective, she claimed that her transfer led to altered scheduling and responsibilities, thereby constituting discrimination in her terms and conditions of employment. The Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals disagreed and held that an employee's reassignment, absent proof of harm resulting from the reassignment, is insufficient to constitute an adverse employment action. Okay, so very significant there. She didn't really suffer any adverse employment action in the form of compensation or really related to scheduling or anything like that. And so the Eighth Circuit said she did not suffer an adverse employment action. And so again, the Supreme Court took this case and they will make that decision on what constitutes an adverse employment action.
This is going to create issues as it relates to affirmative action planning and other things potentially once this decision gets made, depending on what kind of decision they make.
Well, and here's what I think could happen here. On the one hand, broadening what constitutes an adverse employment action would likely enable certain underrepresented employees to more easily bring meritorious employment discrimination claims. It would be easier for them to bring a claim of harassment or really discrimination under Title VII. But on the other hand, it could also allow opponents of diversity, equity, and inclusion to more easily bring reverse discrimination claims against employers without ever alleging that the DE&I initiatives have caused the employee to suffer a materially significant disadvantage. And so expanding the scope of what constitutes an adverse employment action could pose some additional potential risks to employers who adopt DE&I initiatives targeted towards certain protected classes. So I think this is something we really need to pay attention to. I've mentioned her before, Andrea Lucas, who's an EEOC commissioner. She has publicly identified a large roster of DE&I initiatives that Muldrow, this case, could implicate. And she says, quote, from providing race-restricted access to mentoring, sponsorship, or training programs, to selecting interviewees partially due to diverse candidate slate policies, to tying executive or employee compensation to the company achieving certain demographic targets, to offering race-restricted diversity internship programs or accelerated interview processes, something paired with what she's described as euphemistic diversity scholarships that effectively provide more compensation for diverse summer interns. And so again, she, as the commissioner of the EOC, identified all of these areas that could be at risk depending on what the Supreme Court decides in this Muldrow case.
For businesses to run their business with a sincere effort of trying to do the right thing for all the right reasons makes it really hard to do.
Well, that's exactly right, Phil, and that's part of that anxiety that I'm seeing out there. You know, DE&I programs the last several years have become quite popular in the corporate setting, and now you're starting to see somewhat of a backlash against DE&I efforts, and the backlash is really coming in the form of decisions from the courts and, frankly, the lawsuits themselves that people are starting to bring these reverse discrimination claims. And what this gets to is, again, it puts the employees or the employers in those tough situations where they sort of feel like, pardon my profanity, but they're damned if they do, you're damned if you don't. So they want to have a DE&I program, but if they have one, now they're at risk for lawsuits for reverse discrimination. If they don't implement a DE&I program, are they at risk for a regular type of discrimination suit, which again gets to my point, Phil, that any company considering implementing DE&I needs to do so very, very carefully.
You know, work with someone like yourself or AIM to say, hey, take a look at this and tell us what you think on you know, cursory level first. You know, and see if it's not necessarily an audit, but let's look at the program and see what are we trying to achieve and how are we trying to do that to make sure we're managing the risk on all sides of the picture here.
Yeah, and
that's
Phil,
the key thing.
And let me point out one of the difficulties while we're on the topic here. You know, in the Gannett suit that I talked about, the Gannett's being sued by 5 people for reverse race discrimination. What Gannett said was they said that they want their company's workforce to look like the communities in which they operate. Okay, and that's a respectable goal. I understand that. I get that. And you know, that in and of itself, I don't think is an illegal statement. The problem is that the applicant pool does not necessarily look like the communities in which they work. And so they aren't getting the applicants that would enable them to create a workforce that would look like the community in which they operate. So that's what I got for you, Phil. That's a lawyer on the clock, and it's a lot.
Yeah, and as always, I'll be watching for your prediction of mask mandates. As we heard it first here from you, we'll see where that tends to go. I sure hope we're not putting our mask back on personally, just because I don't personally like them. But
I hope I'm wrong.
I in this case hope you're wrong, but great guidance. We're going to go ahead now and move forward. We're going to skip Filbert's forum today. We're going to move right into the program with Mikey Mac. Welcome back to the program. We're happy to have you. It's that time of the year when you're going to bring us your forecast and an outlook for 2024. I'm excited to be the first to help host that and expose it to our members. So welcome back to the program, Mike, and let's get started with your clever forecast.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm so glad to be back, and always good to try to predict the future. I wish I could make money or at least go to Vegas if I'm ever right, because I'm usually not. And but
well, I'll follow you and just do the opposite. How does that sound?
But this is no different than past years. A couple of major shifts, though, that we're starting to see. First of all, if you remember last year about this time, we were talking not only about still dealing with inflation, but remember one of the indicators I talked about was the projection for Social Security adjustments, and it was like off the board, right? Remember, we were talking 6-7% in that area, which was then going to continue to drive, especially labor organizations use that as kind of their starting point for negotiations. They'll say,
Absolutely.
hey, if the feds are going to go 6-7%, we should do the same.
At a
So
minimum.
now the projection, yeah, so now the projection is dropped, and we're getting back down to a more normal 3% is what they're putting in for the Social Security adjustment come January. So
Okay.
that's going to be half of what we saw last year. So that's the first indicator that the world is shifting, or the U.S. economy is shifting in response to fears of recession, which I'll get into in a minute, and also that inflation is still hovering closer to the 3% mark. So that tells us that that's going to become kind of the starting point for a lot of people thinking about their budgets, that Social Security budget. The second thing is the projections on recession. We've been hearing this all year long. We're going to have a recession.
For the last 18 months.
It's coming. It's coming. Trust us. And the feds, of course, keep raising interest rates, saying we have to do that to control everything. Well, it didn't happen. And according to a recent report by the Conference Board, which is kind of a big think tank group that comes out with a lot of economic projections, they're saying that maybe at the end of 2024, there might be a recession, but they're pulling back from those projections, as others. Kiplinger and a few other economic think tanks are starting to pull back, saying, no, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And what's driving that is the unemployment. That when we can continue to see a 3%, 3.5% unemployment rate, and we still can't find people to work, that's still keeping us from moving into a recession, because normally a recession means we have major layoffs in all industries, and therefore that people aren't going to be buying as much, and therefore we get into a recession. It's not happening. And the other thing they pointed out is a lot of people increased their savings during COVID. There's a lot of dollars in banks and savings accounts, according to a report from the Conference Board as well. And they're saying that even if things get a little tough in 2024, people are going to tap into that, which means they're going to still be buying goods and services, and therefore we're not going to have that recession. And then finally, my cardboard box index, the infamous cardboard.
I love the cardboard box index.
Well, you mentioned something a year ago, I believe, Phil, that, it may not necessarily be the economy that changes how many boxes are being bought, but the whole push on being green, on environmental issues. And that is now coming up in the latest cardboard box index report.
There you go. See, I might have my own crystal ball, Mikey.
You should be there. You should just run your own business on that. Forget everything else that AIM does. So that they are experiencing changes on how people are shipping. And so like Amazon, if you notice, you don't get as many boxes anymore. You get like envelopes, and they stuff everything in there. So that has had some shift, but from the major manufacturers, they are not seeing any change going into 2024 in terms of the supply and demand. They are still in demand in terms of your durable goods, refrigerators, stoves, and things like that, which are shipped in big cardboard box containers. Right. So they're not seeing any change going into 2024 as far as a projection of a recession. Okay. Yeah. So again, we can really feel pretty confident that I would say, at least for the first half of 2024, we're going to be pretty much where we are today. We're going to be dealing with a lower kind of a mid-inflation rate, but we're going to not be able to find people to work. So our salaries are going to continue to have to move. And I'll get to that in a second, because that has a direct impact on the budgets for 2024 in terms of what we need to do. And on top of that, minimum wage has not slowed down, meaning that I was just talking to one of your AIM members just last week, and they were moving to $20 an hour from $16 for their start rate. And by the way, this was a nonprofit, which means $4 an hour. That's an $8,000 adjustment for entry-level employees.
Yeah, and they're not the only one. I've seen others do it here more recently as well. just to have a fighting chance at attracting.
You got it. So here comes always the problem in these projections from the major houses, Willis and Mercer and World at Work. When they're projecting compensation budgets, salary budgets, they're really focusing more on the base pay adjustment. And I'll tell you that even with all of that and recession ideas, right now, all the projections are coming in still between 4 and 5%. As far as what we're looking at in 2024. I don't think we're going
Mikey,
to
explain this for our listeners real quick. So you were talking about the Social Security
which is
adjustment,
3%, right?
The 3%, but that alone doesn't determine a budget, a proper budget amount to maintain competitiveness.
Correct. It's only, and the only reason I mention is because if anyone's dealing with upcoming negotiations, unions often will use that as their starting point, not necessarily where they'll end up. But you're right, supply and demand will always override everything else in terms of how much we have to pay people or retain talent to go forward. Yeah. So when we look at our budgeting, yes, we're hearing that 4 to 5 range in terms of salary adjustments. Now that's base pay adjustments
across the board to the greater population, not necessarily just adjusting the entry level pay.
Correct. And that does not include adjusting that entry level pay. That's the problem, is that there's always this unknown as people continue to move. You know, what was it, a couple of years last year? I think we thought 15 was kind of the magical number for entry level. Now I'm going to say if you're at anything below 20, you may be in trouble as you go into 2024, because that is kind of where a lot of people are gravitating to. So Illinois just going to 15, or, well, forget Missouri. I mean, you're 12, 30 or something. And North Carolina, where I live, we're still at the federal $7 and what was it, 7.25?
Yeah, it's all irrelevant. It's the competitive minimum wage that really makes the difference.
So if that continues, and the other thing that's going to have an impact on the additional dollars. So in projecting, you have to be thinking about 2 budgets almost. You have to be thinking about your normal salary adjustment, and that's that 4 to 5% range, somewhere in there. But then you need to have another pool of dollars that you need to be thinking about for special market adjustments. Also, we're still facing the issue of the Gen Z pushing for career progression. And so those promotions have to be built in as well. And of course, now we have the new generation. Have you been following the latest? We have Gen Alpha is the next. Yes, the Gen Alpha is going to be coming into the workplace in a few years. So we'll have to deal with that besides Gen Z. You know, as we boomers continue to fade out.
You know, it's a good thing, though, that we're here to see it, Mike.
Well, we'll see it. At least, I may not make it to Gen Beta, but we'll try to get through Alpha. So when you're budgeting, you have to, think a little bit broader. You have your salary budget, your normal increase that you're figuring out, whether it's merit or COLA or whatever you're doing. But then you got to have that other pool of dollars, which means you should be adding at least another 2% into your compensation total budgeting. So now we're talking not 4 to 5, but you may be looking at anywhere from 6 to 7 in terms of your total potential cost. And CFOs will always push back when you go in and you're budgeting and they ask HR, hey, how much should we be budgeting? And you say, well, 4% for an increase. But then, a lot of CFOs today are pushing back saying, what about all the other adjustments that we need to make? And then I just saw today that the average cost of benefits has gone up 6%, and it's projected for 2024 to go up 6%. So you're going to have all of these dollars that need to be really accounted for. So my friends in human resources, we're becoming really more financial advisors and not just dealing with day-to-day employee issues, but having to really help manage the very large part of the budget of an organization. Is 50 to 60% of the overall expense budget in most organizations.
Yeah, so I know one of the things that you do when you're bringing value to the members of AIM that you're working with one of the things you do not only is, hey, here's the market data. That's easier to get to. There's methods that you can get to discover market data, and you'll be within some range of reasonableness with that. The real value that I see when our members work with you, the feedback that I'm getting, it's how do I properly budget for the adjustments that need to be made to be competitive. And that's a very different game.
It is.
It's not so much a science, it's more of an art.
It is.
And I always remind our members that when you're working with Mikey, you're not necessarily getting a guy that says, well, you got to increase your budget 6% to solve your problems and good luck. And, now you have your data. The real magic comes down to understanding what's important, who is necessary to retain, what positions are tough to fill that we can't fill, that we need to maybe consider doing something different. And then you start looking, and you always talk about it, are those other factors beyond pay. And I know our HR pros that we work with, they're always talking about those factors, but it's really what are they and how are they different?
That's right. How do you
got to be
out?
At least at a minimum level to compete, but then how are they different for your marketplace?
That's right. And the other thing that's really started to become very important, and we're doing it pretty much with all of your members and clients, is the compression issue. Because with the to be competitive, you have to be sure your internal equity is established, meaning how you're paying people internally based on that market range that's been developed. And what's been happening, especially last year with inflation moving so quickly, people started falling out of the box, meaning that we made our moves to be competitive, set our rates, but then we forgot about, Joe over there who's been with us for 10 years, and we just hired, somebody else, and they're making more. And that's going to become even more important in terms of with pay transparency, right? Illinois just signed their law. It starts in, I think, 2025. But still, the country has moved to more pay transparency. What that has created now are challenges. Where am I paying my people now? Now that they know what the pay system is, they're sitting there going, you mean I'm only 2% above the minimum of the range, yet I've been here 12 years? So
and you tell me I'm one of your best workers? Yeah.
That's right. So to be competitive also means you have to be internally competitive with your employees. We need to be equitable, and that becomes, you talk about another cost. Because when we do those studies, it generally costs another 1 to 2% of your compensation budget just to fix those types of things. So you can't forget that. And we do that. We provide that service to at least let you know, well, what's the worst case scenario? And then we work with members on how we can best figure out a way to phase that in to make corrections. And it may be job by job, depending on, the importance of that job in order to recruit and retain. So that's all tied in. So now we're talking from I went from 4 to 5 to 6 to 7. Possibly now we're at 8 to 9 by the time you get all of these things. I know I've scared everybody. They're saying, forget it. We're not going to do a study.
No one's going to work with you now, Mikey. I mean, they're like 8 to 9. You just worked your way right out of the marketplace. I know you're not saying that's 8 to 9 for everyone. You're just saying it depends where you're starting at.
Correct.
And how aggressive you want to be to get where maybe you need to be if you're not already in the right place. So just to clarify, what I think I heard you say is you're probably in that, 5 to 6 range if you're already considering yourself market competitive. If you're already able to compete and you're already able to attract the talent that you want and retain them the way that you need to, then you're probably in that 5-6 range. If you're behind that or in particular areas, then there may need to be a little bit more.
Correct.
What are we seeing, Mike, in the form a year ago? It was really popular, and we were even talking about it on our program here to give consider lump sums to help manage the inflation, to control wage inflation for the purpose of reward and recognition. We kind of moved away from sign-on bonuses and gave bonuses more internally to stay was the recommendation. Right. Are you seeing anything in the space of lump sums and or, spot awards?
Well, it's interesting because that was popular, very popular just last year. Two things have happened. Number one, and I think Bert can always jump in on this later, the whole issue of FLSA regulations regarding non-exempt bonuses, meaning that if you're doing bonuses that are tied to the work, even if they're, they have to be viewed discretionary and there's a lot of rules. Well, we've had a number of clients that got their hands caught in the cookie jar. They were giving out these bonuses, but they were linking them to productivity. They were linking them to, right. in the job. And they did not account for overtime that must be included when you're providing those kinds of bonuses. So, of course, when your hand's caught in the cookie jar, like at home, we take away the cookie jar. And so what happened was the reaction to that was a number of organizations stopped doing that, right? Because they're not going to deal with that. It's too complicated to figure out. So that's the number one thing. Number two, with inflation now becoming more manageable, a lot of those bonuses were tied, a lot of them called them inflation bonuses, right, to help you get through in the cost. However, in terms of pay for performance, we're still seeing the trend of not making the merit pay for performance increase tied to your base pay, but providing it as a separate amount. And again, same issue, though, with non-exempts, you have to deal with the overtime with that as well. Yeah. However, it is a way to send a message that performance recognition needs to be re-earned every year. And so, again, if you can work through the minutia of the law on your non-exempts, it's a great way to send a message that you need to come back and show us what you can do next year.
Yeah, and that minutia is not too bad when you got people like Bert and myself guiding you. But right. I mean, we got to be careful with that. I think that's very diligent of you to point out. So
well, and what I was surprised recently with some of your members is that they're not using any payroll systems. They're doing it themselves. And I was kind of surprised to hear that. In this day and age, I figure everybody's using somebody. And those companies have all that type of thing set up. And I just had one of your members, again, a nonprofit, they said, no, we have a spreadsheet that the payroll person tries to manually figure out, if the overtime's right and how much to put into the check. And I'm going, oh, that makes it tough.
That it does happen. I mean, we do find that we have solutions should anyone find themselves in that space where we can help.
Mike, Mike, I'm having visions here of somebody literally having an old abacus out trying to do their payroll with an abacus.
All right. Well, there you heard it from Mikey. If we wrap it up, probably somewhere into that, 5%, 5.5%, 6% general wage increase for budgeting, unless you're behind in your pay scale system. Should you want to reach out to Mikey, just let us know, talk with your advisor, and we'll be able to set you up with a meeting, and I will promise you will walk out of that meeting and be a better HR professional or better business leader because of it. Mikey, thank you very much. We will be back on the program next week at 7:30 Central Time. We'll see you then. Until then,
be good, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you once again for tuning in to This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your colleagues. Forward our invites. Share the link, aimea.org/thisweekatwork, or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment, like LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're everywhere you are. And you can be part of the show. Send your questions and comments anytime to info@thisweek.work. We'll see you next week, 7:30 a.m. Central Time, when we discuss what's happening this week at work.